Right here, hello Year 11. Here we are again. So this is the lesson that has been delivered to you on Monday, 23rd of March. Just before we begin this one, just to remind you as well, all of the worksheets and information sheets on Show My Homework to work alongside this presentation. So you need to have them open on your computer or have them printed out, please, while you're going through this. If there are any problems with you accessing that, please get to me on Show My Homework as soon as possible so I can figure out something to do for you. So if you don't have access to Word or you are unable to read it for whatever reason, just let me know. For this lesson, I'd like you to upload all of your work you've done, so your completed worksheet, by the end of Wednesday, 25th of March, please. Okay, so we're going to just have a look at what we're doing today. And it is, well, we're looking at what attempts were there to reduce the superpower tensions in the 1970s. So the very first thing that I would like you to do is just to watch this video here. So there's a state visit that took place by Richard Nixon to the Soviet Union in 1972. So if you could watch that video, and while you do that, give this some thought. So what impression do you have of this event? What is it suggesting to us about superpower relations in the early 1970s? So if you want to pause your video and watch that and just try to complete the starter questions on your worksheet for about 3 minutes, that would be brilliant. I'll give you time to pause the video now. Okay, so I assume you've watched that video and you've given some thought to why maybe this event could have been significant. It's something you'll see today, and we'll have a little bit of a look at why that was really important. So let's move on. So the key thing we really see today is that there was a massive push for peace between both the USA and the Soviet Union from the 1970s onwards. Why was that? Well, we've already seen that there was some pretty hairy moments in the 1960s that really worried both sides here, particularly the Cuban Missile Crisis, that really showed that even though neither country wanted to necessarily go to war, it only took a few bits of miscommunication or a few mistakes to have really pushed the world towards a nuclear apocalypse. And we've seen that there were a couple of consequences that had come out from the Cuban Missile Crisis that did try to bring the tensions down quite a bit between the USA and the Soviet Union. So let's just remind ourselves of what they were. So in 1963, there's the hotline that's set up, which is the phone line that's directly run from Washington to Moscow, and either side are able to talk to one another if things become a little bit too sort of difficult, or if there's any sort of communication errors there, then they can speak to one another. You've also got the Test Ban Treaty, so remember that's the one that stopped the USA and the Soviet Union and also the UK from testing nuclear warheads in space, underwater or in the atmosphere. They could still test them underground, but just not in space, underwater or in the atmosphere. Next, you've got the Outer Space Treaty that was signed in 1967. So remember, the space race had really heated up by this time, and this meant that no nuclear weapons could be in orbit of Earth. If nuclear weapons were in orbit of Earth, that is particularly very dangerous for both superpowers, because it meant that, or it could mean that, those nuclear weapons could easily reach their target after being brought out of orbit once again. So that was very significant. Next, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And remember that non-proliferation means the stopping of the spread. So this treaty said that countries can't share offensive nuclear technology with other countries, meaning that the whole world doesn't become armed with nuclear weapons. So very significant in slowing down the sort of tensions of nuclear war across the whole world. But there was a renewed and maybe a furthered call for peace in the 1970s, although we've seen these measures in the 1960s take place. So let's try and understand why. Well, I've put a timeline down here for you. So on the top side is what happened in the USA, and on the bottom is what happened in the Soviet Union. And we're going to just focus here on some of the weapons that were being produced. So first, we see in 1957 these intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs for short, are being produced in America. So if it's intercontinental, that means that it can take off from the Americas and potentially land in Europe. That's very significant. Okay, that's going to raise the tension of the Cold War. And very shortly after, just 1 year after that, they were also replicated in the Soviet Union. So both sides now have these missiles that's able to reach another continent. Moving on from that, by 1960, submarine launched ballistic missiles, or SLBCs for short, are being produced in the USA. So this means that nuclear warheads are being put onto submarines. Submarines are not detected very easily at all by ships or by satellites or by anything, so the submarines can easily sort of hide away. So that kind of racks up the tension between both sides, because neither of them are really sure whereabouts the nuclear weapons actually are. They could be anywhere in the sea. And we see then a response come straight from the Soviet Union. Well, not straight away, but 8 years later, we know that these SLBCs were also being produced in the Soviet Union. And in the same year, these anti-ballistic missiles, so ABMs for short, were developed to intercept the intercontinental ballistic missiles. So what they would be doing is these anti-ballistic missiles would be on the back of these large sort of tank-looking things, and they would be there to shoot down any potential intercontinental ballistic missiles that would come their way. And again, shortly after that, the same thing is being developed by the USA. So although we are seeing these efforts that have come in the 1960s to really slow down the Cold War and to bring the tension down, actually what we're seeing is there's a lot of technological development that is being made by both sides for war. So even though these treaties are saying that certain things can't happen, there definitely still is this huge arms race that is still going on in terms of technology between the two sides here. So in the 1970s, we see this renewed call for peace. One thing to just bear in mind as well when we have a look at today's lesson is there is a significant change in leadership following from Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. And so in 1968, we have President Richard Nixon, who comes to take America through the next few years. Now, this is a really significant time for America, and the 1960s have been an extremely important decade for America. As you can see on the bullet points there, Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. The Civil Rights Movement had successfully sought African Americans and civil liberties, but Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. And lastly, the Vietnam War had been having a huge human and economic impact on the country. Essentially, Richard Nixon had adopted a country that was tearing itself apart, and America needed a bit of a breather. It needed to get itself back on track. So Nixon's main thoughts really in terms of his foreign policy was how could he ensure he could stabilise his country and make sure that things could progress nicely and bring things just down a level a little bit. Okay. This is just some of the things that America had seen. I just wanted to show you this. So we've got the aftermath of quite a lot of the race riots that had happened in Chicago following Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. And also we've got just some pictures here to show you the sort of impact of the Vietnam War. So some of the injured US troops here, plenty of men who were in that US army in that war were really severely injured or killed from that war. It was probably one of the most gruesome wars of all time. We've got a similar situation going on, well, not similar to the same point, but we can kind of see that there might be some collaborative thinking from the Soviet Union for these reasons. So we can see that Soviet communism hasn't really changed. It's still presenting the same problems as what it always has done. Living standards are continuing to be quite poor in the Soviet Union. The economy wasn't developing to the point that the Soviet Union Communist Party or government was wanting. And finally, those development of the nuclear weapons from this arms race was expensive, and it was stopping a lot of the economic development happening in the Soviet Union. So all of these factors meant that also in the Soviet Union there was an appetite for improving relations with the USA and bringing down that tension. So what we see is these two sides trying to work towards this policy called détente. And that means that when there is a period of détente, that is a period of peace between two groups that were previously at war or hostile to one another. So today we're going to be looking at and exploring how far détente was actually achieved in the 1970s by these two leaders. So the very first thing I am going to ask you to do is just to spend a couple of minutes putting these key words into your word banks, please. I'll upload a word bank onto Show My Homework. Please use that to keep your keywords in from now on. So I'll just go through what these mean. Détente, as I've already said, is that period of peace between two groups when they've previously been hostile to one another. So it's just a cooling off period, essentially. An interim, that's a temporary or a short-term thing. You'll see something called the interim treaty today. So if that was a temporary treaty, it didn't last forever. That's just something to keep your eyes out for. We have this acronym SALT, which stands for Strategic Arms Limitations Talks. There were two of them that were being held between both the Soviet Union and the USA. So SALT is for short. And you've already seen this one at the bottom here, mutually assured destruction. That's the idea that when countries have nuclear weapons, it's very unlikely for them to actually attack the other one because they know that they have nuclear weapons and their enemy can then send nuclear weapons back over to the country that first attacked. So it'd just be silly for a country to really start antagonizing the other. So I wanted to put that back there just to remind you about that sort of theory. So if you could just pause the video now for about 3 minutes and just put those into your keyword banks, that would be brilliant. Okay, I'm assuming that you've put those into your word banks now, so we will move on. We're going to get onto the tasks now. So the very first thing I would like you to do is there's the information sheet that I've put on Show My Homework. So firstly, I want you to think about this question here. What progress was made in reducing superpower tensions in the 1970s? So read the information on the following. There's firstly the push for détente in the 1970s. Then there's SALT 1 in 1979. You then have Nixon's visit to Moscow, which you saw the video of at the beginning of this lesson, in 1974. Then you have the Helsinki Agreements in 1975. Then the Apollo-Soyuz space mission in 1975 as well. And finally, we have SALT 2 in 1979. Sorry, I've said that SALT 1 is in 1979. It wasn't. It was in 1972. SALT 2 is in 1979. Sorry for that error there. So complete the worksheet on this information, please. You just have a couple of questions and a flowchart to fill in. And please also try these challenge questions for me as well. So as you go through, think about what was the most and least significant event in bringing about détente, and overall, how successful were the superpowers in achieving détente by 1979. So this all should take you about 15 minutes, so read the information please, complete the tasks in your worksheet. I'll give you time to pause the video now. Okay, so you would have read all of the information here and completed your task on what progress was made by the two superpowers. The next thing is to think about how this all came to an end. It came to a very abrupt end in the late period of 1979. So this period of détente just seemed to fail. Now I just want you to create a very short flowchart based on the information that you've been given. So the very first sort of event that had happened in late this didn't particularly happen in late 1979. It might have been a bit of a precursor to everything that happened in late 1979. But we see that President Carter, who was the new president after Richard Nixon, he started to question the Soviet Union's commitment to improving human rights. So look through the rest of the information. How can you then put the rest into a very short flowchart on your worksheets to explain why détente came to an end? And again, I've got some challenge questions here for you. What was the most significant event in this collapse of détente? And when you've answered that, can you think, could anything have been done by either side to avoid this? Could détente have continued from 1979 onwards, or was it inevitable that this was going to come to a crashing end? Okay, so again, this should probably take you about 10 minutes. You can pause the video now and start to complete this task. I'll give you time to pause now. Okay, you should have completed that flowchart and attempted the challenge questions there. The very final thing I'd like you to do today then is try a narrative account question. I've put the structure up here for you to give this a go. Once again, I mean, I've explained how to do this in previous videos and in previous lessons. I'll go through this one more time with you. Remember that when you're doing a narrative account question, you have to pick out 3 different points about a main development or the key events of something. Okay, so let's quickly look at the question I'm asking you to do before I talk through that. So here we go. Write a narrative account analysing the key events of détente in the years 1970 to 79. It's 8 marks. So it gives you the following 2 to use in your answer. It says SALT 1 of 1972 and the Helsinki Accords of 1975. Now remember, it also says you must use information of your own. So when we look at the structure again, the very first thing I want you to do is bullet point down all the things that you could put into this answer first of all. Remember, you only need 3 and 2 of them are given there for you. So it's already given you SALT 1 and the Helsinki Accords, but you need to think of one more to put in here. So jot down everything you can think about for the time being. You then need to put it in chronological order. So you start with the very first one first. You talk about the points, so what it was. You then put in your evidence where you put in your spend, and you then explain why that was a key development for this main event. You then link it to the next point. Remember to use some linking words, okay, when you've got the next point in your narrative account, and do exactly the same for that. And then finally, you link it to your very final point in the narrative account, and you again use a linking word to link that part to the previous one. You then add in your evidence again, so lots of nice spend, and finally an explanation. If we can do all of that, it's 8 marks. So this should probably take you about 15 minutes, I think, to plan your answer and start writing. So if we could do that at the bottom of our worksheet, please, that would be absolutely brilliant. I'll give you time to pause the video now. Okay, brilliant. Well done. You should have written that narrative account by now, so well done if you have. That's absolutely fantastic. Just once again, please make sure that all of your completed work is just uploaded to me on Show My Homework no later than by the end of Wednesday, please, because we have our next lesson, I believe. Let me just check my timetable. We have our next lesson on Wednesday, so it would be good if you can have everything done by Wednesday so that you can then start on our next lesson. Okay, so well done, Year 11. Keep working hard, and I will see you soon.